The rent check arrives every month like clockwork. $1,650, signed in careful cursive by Jessica Anderson, my tenant in the duplex I own on Schilling Avenue in Blackfoot, Idaho. What Jessica doesn't know is that the man she once called a worthless failure is now her landlord. What she doesn't know is that every month, she's funding the empire built on the ashes of her prediction that I'd never amount to anything. My name is Robert Bobby Mitchell. I'm 35 years old, and I own 7 rental properties across southeastern Idaho. 3 years ago, I was a dishwasher at Murphy's Family Restaurant making $11 an hour. 3 years ago, Jessica looked me dead in the eye and told me I was destined to be poor forever. Tonight, I'm reviewing applications for my 8th property while her monthly rent payment sits deposited in my business account. Sometimes the people who write you off end up writing your paychecks. Blackfoot isn't the kind of place where dreams are supposed to come true. It's a farming town of 12,000 people where the biggest excitement is the county fair each August and Friday night football at the high school. Most people are born here, live here, and die here without ever questioning if there might be something more. I was one of those people until Jessica Anderson changed everything. We met during my 2nd year at Idaho State University in Pocatello. I was studying business administration while working nights at a truck stop to pay for classes. Jessica was getting her teaching degree, supported entirely by her parents who owned Anderson's Hardware, the biggest store of its kind in 3 counties. Her father, Tom Anderson, had built the business from a single location into a regional chain. Her mother, Patricia, served on the school board and organized every charity drive in Bingham County. Jessica grew up in a world where money was never a question, where college was assumed, where success was inherited rather than earned. I grew up in a single-wide trailer with my grandmother, Marie, who raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. Grandma Marie worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and serving lunch at the elementary school during the day, to keep food on our table and clothes on my back. The contrast should have been obvious from the start, but when you're 22 and in love, you believe that feelings can bridge any gap. Jessica seemed fascinated by my work ethic, charmed by what she called my bootstraps mentality. She'd watch me study while eating dinner from a can, marveling at how I could focus despite the chaos of poverty surrounding us. For 2 years, we built a relationship that I thought was solid. I drive the 45 minutes from Blackfoot to Pocatello 3 times a week to see her, burning gas money I couldn't afford because being with her felt like glimpsing a different kind of life. She'd visit Blackfoot occasionally, usually on weekends when she was bored with campus life, though she never stayed long and always had excuses for why she couldn't meet Grandma Marie. During those college years, I developed habits that Jessica found endearing at first, then annoying. I saved every dollar I could, worked extra shifts whenever possible, and tracked every expense in a small notebook I carried everywhere. While her friends were spring breaking in Cancun, I was picking up overtime at the truck stop. While they were buying new clothes for parties, I was shopping at thrift stores and mending torn seams with thread Grandma Marie taught me to use. Jessica would tease me about my frugality, calling me her little saver when I'd decline expensive restaurants or suggest we split appetizers instead of ordering individual meals. She found it cute that I drove a 1995 Ford Ranger with 200,000 miles and a passenger door that wouldn't open from the inside. She thought it was charming that I lived in the cheapest apartment in town, sharing space with 2 roommates and sleeping on a mattress on the floor. What she didn't know was that beneath the poverty she could see, I was building something she couldn't. Every month, without fail, I put aside whatever money I could into a savings account at Blackfoot Community Bank. Sometimes it was $50, sometimes it was $200, but it was always something. I'd learned from watching Grandma Marie stretch every dollar that real security came not from what you earned, but from what you kept. By the time we graduated, I had managed to accumulate $8,000 in savings while working my way through school debt-free. It wasn't much by most standards, but it represented 4 years of sacrifice, for years of saying no to everything that wasn't essential, for years of betting on a future that nobody else could see. Jessica graduated with a teaching degree and immediately landed a job at Blackfoot Elementary, the same school where Grandma Marie served lunch. The irony wasn't lost on me. My girlfriend would be working in the same building where my grandmother had spent 15 years ladling mashed potatoes onto plastic trays for $9 an hour. I moved back to Blackfoot after graduation, taking a job as a cook at Murphy's Family Restaurant while I figured out my next move. Jessica moved back, too, into a small house her parents bought her as a graduation gift. She decorated it with furniture from Pottery Barn and throws from Target, creating the kind of cozy space that appeared effortless but cost more than I made in 6 months. For the first year after college, our relationship settled into a comfortable routine. Jessica taught 3rd grade and complained about her salary of $32,000 a year, which was more money than I'd ever seen anyone in my family make. I worked at Murphy's for $11 an hour, pulling double shifts on weekends and holidays, coming home smelling like fryer oil and dishwater. The problems started slowly, like hairline cracks in a foundation that eventually bring down the whole structure. Jessica's teaching job put her in contact with other professionals. The principal who drove a new Subaru Outback, the 4th grade teacher whose husband managed the bank, the school secretary whose family owned a cabin at Bear Lake. Suddenly, my used Ford Ranger and thrift store clothes became sources of embarrassment rather than charm. She started making comments about my appearance when we went to social events. Nothing cruel, just observations that cut deeper than insults would have. She'd suggest I buy a nicer shirt for the school's fundraising dinner, then offer to loan me money when I said I couldn't afford it. She'd compare my work schedule to her friends' boyfriends, wondering aloud why I couldn't find a job with normal hours and better pay. The comments multiplied as Jessica's social circle expanded. She joined the Blackfoot Young Professionals Group, a collection of 20-somethings who met monthly to network and plan community events. These were the sons and daughters of local business owners, the inheritors of established success, the people who saw opportunity as a birthright rather than something you had to fight for. I attended exactly 3 of their meetings. The first time, I was introduced as Jessica's boyfriend who worked at Murphy's. The second time, I became the boyfriend who was figuring things out. By the 3rd meeting, Jessica was making jokes about how I was her project and how she was going to motivate me to reach my potential. The laughter was polite but pointed, and I stopped going. While Jessica was expanding her social horizons, I was quietly expanding my financial ones. The savings account that had started with my college money was growing steadily. Every month, I deposited whatever I could spare from my restaurant wages. I'd also started a small side business that Jessica knew nothing about, buying broken small appliances from garage sales and estate sales, fixing them in Grandma Marie's garage, and reselling them online. The appliance repair business started almost by accident. I'd always been good with my hands, learning basic mechanics and electronics from necessity rather than formal training. When you grow up poor, you learn to fix things instead of replacing them. What I discovered was that many people threw away appliances that needed only simple repairs: a new heating element in a toaster, a replaced belt in a vacuum cleaner, a cleaned connection in a coffee maker. I'd spend Saturday mornings driving to garage sales across southeastern Idaho, loading my truck bed with broken appliances that cost $5 or $10 each. Saturday afternoons were spent in Grandma Marie's garage, taking things apart and putting them back together. Sunday evenings, I'd list the repaired items online, usually selling them for 10 to 20 times what I'd paid. The business was small but consistent. Some months, I made an extra $200. Other months, I made $500. The money went straight into savings, and I never mentioned it to Jessica. She saw my restaurant uniform and my tired eyes, but she didn't see the growing balance in my account or the business skills I was developing through trial and error. By our 2nd year back in Blackfoot, Jessica's patience with my circumstances was wearing thin. She'd gotten a raise to $35,000 and was talking about graduate school, about getting her master's degree and eventually moving into administration. Her friends were buying houses, getting engaged, planning futures that extended beyond the borders of Bingham County. I was still cooking at Murphy's, still living in a small apartment above downtown Blackfoot's only bookstore, still driving the same truck that had gotten me through college. From the outside, it looked like I was treading water while everyone else was swimming toward shore. What Jessica couldn't see was that I was preparing for something bigger. The savings account had grown to $15,000. The appliance business was generating steady income. I'd started reading every book I could find about real estate investment, entrepreneurship, and building wealth. Late nights when Jessica thought I was watching television, I was actually researching property values, studying market trends, and learning about financing options. The end came during our third year together, triggered by an event that seemed insignificant but revealed everything about how we saw each other and ourselves. It was a Friday night in October, and Jessica had invited me to a dinner party at her friend Amanda's house. Amanda was engaged to Jake Thompson, whose family owned Thompson's Implement, the John Deere dealership that served farmers across 3 counties. The party was supposed to be casual, but casual in Jessica's world meant button-down shirts and wine that cost more than I made in a day. I arrived at Amanda's house after my shift at Murphy's, having changed into my cleanest jeans and only collared shirt. The other guests were already there: teachers, bank employees, the manager of the local John Deere store, people whose definition of struggle was choosing between vacation destinations rather than choosing between rent and groceries. The conversation naturally turned to future plans. Amanda and Jake were looking at houses, debating between a new construction in a subdivision being built on the outskirts of town and a renovated farmhouse with acreage. Another couple was discussing their upcoming wedding, comparing venues and caterers with the casual confidence of people who had never questioned whether they could afford their dreams. Jessica jumped into the conversation eagerly, talking about her plans to pursue a master's degree and eventually move into school administration. She mentioned possibly relocating to Boise or Salt Lake City, where administrative positions paid significantly more than teaching jobs in rural Idaho. Then Jake turned to me with the polite interest of someone making required conversation. "What about you, Bobby? What are your plans?" It was an innocent question, but it landed like a challenge. I could feel Jessica tense beside me, suddenly aware that her boyfriend's answer wasn't going to match the upward trajectory everyone else was describing. I said I was saving money and looking at different opportunities, which was true, but vague enough to avoid details I wasn't ready to share. Jake nodded politely and moved on to safer topics, but I caught the look that passed between him and Amanda, the same look I'd seen countless times in my life, the look that said some people were meant for bigger things, and some people weren't. The ride home was quiet until we reached Jessica's house. She invited me in, but I could tell from her tone that she had something to say. I followed her into the living room, where she paced for a moment before finally sitting down across from me. She started gently, talking about how much she cared about me and how she wanted the best for both of us. But as she continued, her frustration became clear. She was tired of making excuses for my lack of ambition. She was embarrassed by my job, my truck, my apparent contentment with a life that was going nowhere. The conversation escalated slowly, each of us revealing grievances that had been building for months. She accused me of being satisfied with mediocrity. I accused her of being ashamed of who I was. She said she tried to help me see my potential, but I wasn't interested in changing. I said she tried to change me into someone I wasn't supposed to be. Then she said the words that changed everything. "You're never going to amount to anything, Bobby. You're going to be washing dishes at Murphy's when you're 40, driving that same broken-down truck, living in that same crappy apartment. Some people are just meant to stay where they are, and you're one of them." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just stood up and walked toward the door. As I was leaving, she called after me, her voice sharp with finality. "Don't call me. I'm done pretending this is going somewhere. I drove home in silence, parked my truck in its usual spot, and climbed the stairs to my apartment above the bookstore. But instead of feeling devastated, I felt something unexpected: clarity. For the first time in 3 years, I had a clear picture of how Jessica saw me, and more importantly, I had a clear picture of how I was going to prove her wrong. That night, I didn't mourn the end of our relationship. Instead, I made plans that would have surprised everyone who thought they knew me. The Monday after Jessica ended our relationship, I walked into Blackfoot Community Bank and asked to speak with someone about real estate loans. The loan officer, a middle-aged woman named Carol Jensen, listened patiently as I explained my situation. I had $18,000 in savings, a steady job history, and good credit from years of carefully managing the few debts I'd accumulated. Carol walked me through various loan programs, including options for first-time homebuyers and investors. What I learned surprised me. With my savings and income, I qualified for more financing than I'd expected. More importantly, I learned about a strategy called house hacking: buying a duplex, living in one unit, and renting out the other to help cover the mortgage. I spent the next 2 weeks driving around Blackfoot and the surrounding area, looking at properties with Tom Bradley, a real estate agent who specialized in investment properties. Most of what we saw was out of my price range or in such poor condition that repairs would eat up all my savings. But on a gray Thursday afternoon in November, we found it. The property was a duplex on Schilling Avenue, built in the 1970s but well-maintained by its elderly owner who was moving to assisted living. Each unit had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a small kitchen. Nothing fancy, but solid bones and a good foundation. The asking price was $89,000, which seemed like a fortune to me, but was actually below market value due to the owner's motivation to sell quickly. I made an offer of $85,000 with 20% down, using almost all of my savings for the down payment and closing costs. My monthly mortgage payment would be $547, and Tom estimated that each unit could rent for $650 per month. If I lived in one unit and rented out the other, I'd actually be making money while building equity. The seller accepted my offer, and 6 weeks later, I was a property owner. I moved into the left unit of the duplex and immediately began advertising the right unit for rent. Within 2 weeks, I had my first tenant, a young couple who worked at the potato processing plant outside town. For the first time in my life, I was making money while I slept. The rent from my tenant more than covered my mortgage payment, leaving me with extra cash each month that I could put back into savings or property improvements. I kept working at Murphy's, not because I needed the income to survive, but because every dollar I earned there could go toward acquiring the next property. The transformation wasn't immediate or dramatic. From the outside, I probably looked exactly the same job, same truck, same routine. But underneath, everything had changed. I was no longer working to pay bills and survive. I was working to build something bigger than myself, something that would compound over time into real wealth. Within 6 months of buying the duplex, I'd saved enough for another down payment. This time, I bought a single-family house that needed cosmetic work, new paint, updated flooring, minor plumbing repairs. I spent weekends learning to do much of the work myself, watching YouTube videos and asking advice from contractors I met at the hardware store. The second property took longer to rent, but when I finally found the right tenant, it was cash flowing $200 per month after all expenses. Combined with the income from the duplex, I was now making an extra $450 per month in passive income. I bought my third property 8 months later, then my fourth 6 months after that. Each purchase got easier as I learned the systems, built relationships with contractors and property managers, and developed an eye for deals that other investors missed. By the end of my second year as a property owner, I had 5 rental units generating a combined monthly income of over $1,800 after expenses. I was still working part-time at Murphy's, but only because I wanted to maintain steady employment for loan qualification purposes. Most of my time and energy was focused on finding, purchasing, renovating, and managing properties. Jessica, meanwhile, had moved on with her life in ways that intersected with mine in unexpected ways. She'd gotten her master's degree through night classes and summer courses, earning a promotion to assistant principal at Blackfoot Middle School. She'd also gotten married to Kevin Palmer, a bank loan officer whose family had connections throughout southeastern Idaho's business community. I learned about Jessica's marriage through small-town gossip rather than direct communication. We hadn't spoken since our breakup, and I had no interest in rekindling contact. But Blackfoot is small enough that you can't avoid hearing about major life events, especially when they involve people you used to know. What I found most interesting about Jessica's new life was how quickly she'd settled into the conventional path she'd always seemed destined for: career advancement through education and connections, marriage to someone from an established local family, a lifestyle built on dual professional incomes, and social respectability. It was exactly the kind of life she'd wanted me to aspire to, and exactly the kind of life I discovered I didn't want at all. By my third year as a property owner, I had developed systems that allowed me to scale efficiently. I'd built relationships with reliable contractors, established credit lines with multiple lenders, and created processes for evaluating deals quickly and accurately. My portfolio had grown to 7 properties, generating enough passive income that I could have quit my job at Murphy's entirely. But I didn't quit, because I'd learned that having W-2 income made loan qualification easier, and I wasn't done expanding. Instead, I reduced my restaurant hours to part-time and used the extra time to focus on property acquisition and management. The business had also evolved beyond simple buy-and-hold rentals. I'd started flipping houses, buying distressed properties, renovating them quickly, and selling them for profit that I could reinvest into more rental properties. The appliance repair skills I developed as a side business translated well to general renovation work, and I was able to do much of the labor myself, maximizing profit margins. One of my flip projects was a small house on the west side of Blackfoot that I'd purchased for $35,000 from a family facing foreclosure. The house needed everything: new electrical, updated plumbing, a complete kitchen renovation, and structural repairs to the foundation. Most investors would have walked away, but I saw opportunity where others saw problems. I spent 4 months working on the house during evenings and weekends, learning new skills and solving problems that would have cost thousands of dollars to hire out. When I finished, I transformed a nearly condemned property into a move-in-ready home that I sold for $78,000. After holding costs and materials, I netted $28,000 in profit, more money than I'd made in an entire year at the restaurant. The flip success gave me confidence to take on bigger projects and more aggressive timelines. Over the next year, I completed 3 more flips, each one teaching me something new about construction, project management, and real estate markets. But it was my 7th rental property that would bring my story full circle with Jessica in a way neither of us could have predicted. In the spring of my 4th year as an investor, I found a property that checked every box on my criteria list. It was a duplex on Schilling Avenue, just 3 blocks from my first purchase, built in the 1980s with solid construction and minimal deferred maintenance. The owner was relocating for work and motivated to sell quickly. More importantly, the property was located in a neighborhood that was quietly gentrifying. Young professionals were moving in, attracted by the affordable housing costs and proximity to both Blackfoot's downtown and the larger job market in Pocatello. Property values were rising steadily, and rental demand was strong. I made an offer of $125,000, which was accepted without negotiation. The numbers worked perfectly. After my down payment and closing costs, my monthly mortgage would be $890, and each unit could rent for approximately $825 per month. With both units rented, I'd have positive cash flow of over $750 monthly. I closed on the property in May and immediately began marketing both units for rent. The left unit rented quickly to a couple with young children who worked at the hospital in Pocatello. The right unit took longer to fill, but in late June, I received an application that made me stop and read twice. The applicant's name was Jessica Palmer, and she was looking for a 6-month lease while she and her husband figured out their next living situation. According to the application, she worked as an assistant principal at the local middle school, and her husband worked in banking. Their combined income was more than sufficient to cover the rent, and their credit scores were excellent. Jessica Palmer. My Jessica, now married and looking for temporary housing in the same neighborhood she'd once described as beneath her standards. I called my property manager, Linda Morrison, who handled most of my tenant interactions to maintain distance between myself and renters. Linda confirmed that the applicant seemed ideal and recommended approval. She'd scheduled a showing for that afternoon. I found myself driving by the property at the appointed time, curious to see Jessica after 3 years of no contact. I parked across the street and watched as a Honda CR-V pulled into the driveway. Jessica got out of the passenger side, followed by a man I assumed was her husband Kevin. She looked essentially the same, though perhaps more polished in the way that comes with professional success and financial stability. Her clothes were nicer, her car was newer, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone whose life was proceeding according to plan. But there was something else in her posture, a tension that hadn't been there during our college years or even during our relationship. She walked through the property with the careful attention of someone who was used to evaluating value, but also with the slight desperation of someone whose options were more limited than they appeared. Linda later told me that the couple had loved the property and wanted to move in as soon as possible. Their current housing situation wasn't working out, and they needed something temporary while they looked for a house to buy. I approved the application that evening, authorizing Linda to handle all the paperwork and move-in procedures. Jessica Palmer would become my tenant without ever knowing that her new landlord was the man she'd once dismissed as destined for permanent failure. Her first rent check arrived on July 1st, written in the same careful handwriting I remembered from college, made out to SMR Property Management, the LLC I'd created to hold my real estate investments. The amount was $1,650 per month, representing the highest rent I'd ever charged for a property. Every month since then, Jessica's rent check has arrived on time. Every month, her payment has been deposited into the business account that funds my growing real estate portfolio. Every month, she's contributed to the financial success of the man she'd predicted would never amount to anything. While Jessica has been paying me rent, my business has continued expanding. I now own 9 rental properties and have completed 12 successful flips. My monthly passive income exceeds $4,000, and my net worth has grown to over $300,000, a figure that would have seemed impossible during my dishwashing days at Murphy's. The success hasn't come without challenges. Property management requires constant attention. Construction projects always cost more than estimated, and finding good tenants can be time-consuming and stressful. But every obstacle has been a learning opportunity, and every setback has been temporary. More importantly, the business has given me something I'd never experienced before: genuine financial security. I no longer worry about unexpected expenses or job loss. I no longer feel trapped by circumstances beyond my control. I've built something that generates income independent of my physical presence, something that grows in value over time, something that provides options rather than limitations. The transformation has been internal as much as financial. 3 years ago, I defined my worth through Jessica's eyes, seeing myself as someone who was falling behind, someone who lacked ambition, someone who was destined for a small life in a small town. Today, I define my worth through results I've created, problems I've solved, and value I've provided to tenants who depend on my properties for shelter. I still live simply, though now it's by choice rather than necessity. I still drive the same Ford Ranger, though I've had it completely rebuilt with a new engine and transmission. I still work part-time at Murphy's, though now it's primarily for the health insurance benefits and to maintain relationships with people who've known me since before my success. The biggest change is internal. I no longer feel like I'm proving anything to anyone. Jessica's prediction about my future motivated me initially, but it stopped matching somewhere along the journey. The business became about building something meaningful rather than disproving someone else's limiting beliefs. Still, there's undeniable satisfaction in knowing that the woman who once called me worthless is now funding my financial independence with her monthly rent payments. Last month, I was at Anderson's Hardware, the store Jessica's father built into a regional chain, picking up materials for a bathroom renovation in one of my rental properties. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now one of Tom Anderson's better customers, regularly spending hundreds of dollars on tools and supplies for my various projects. I was comparing prices on bathroom vanities when I heard a familiar voice in the next aisle. Jessica was talking to one of the sales clerks about kitchen cabinet hardware, apparently working on a project of her own. I could have easily avoided the encounter by leaving through a different exit or waiting for her to finish her business. Instead, I found myself curious about what she might say, how she might react to seeing the man she'd written off 3 years earlier. I rounded the corner with a shopping cart full of plumbing supplies and renovation materials, wearing work clothes that were clean but clearly well used. Jessica looked up from a display of cabinet knobs and froze for a moment before recognition set in. "Bobby," she said, with the careful tone of someone navigating an unexpected social situation. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Jessica," I replied evenly. "Good to see you. How are things?" We made small talk for a few minutes, covering the basics of work and life without diving into anything substantial. She mentioned that she and Kevin were renovating their kitchen, and I mentioned that I was working on a bathroom project. Neither of us specified that her project was on her personal home, while mine was on one of several investment properties I owned. She seemed genuinely curious about what I was up to these days, asking about my work and my plans with the kind of polite interest that suggested she expected the same old story of struggle and stagnation. When I mentioned that I was working on several projects around town, she nodded with what looked like sympathy, probably assuming I was doing handyman work to supplement my restaurant income. When I mentioned that business was going well, she smiled politely, but without much interest. The conversation was pleasant but surface level, the kind of exchange you might have with any acquaintance you hadn't seen in several years. There was no hostility, but also no real connection. Just two people whose lives had diverged in ways that made meaningful conversation difficult. As we parted ways in the parking lot, Jessica paused beside her CRV and looked back at me loading lumber into my truck. "It's good to see you doing well, Bobby," she said, and I could tell she meant it, even if her definition of doing well was probably different from mine. "Thanks," I replied. "I hope the kitchen renovation goes smoothly." I watched her drive away, realizing that the encounter had been anticlimactic in the best possible way. There was no drama, no confrontation, no moment of revelation where she discovered the truth about my success. Just two adults being civil to each other despite their complicated history. But as I drove home, I found myself thinking about the layers of irony in our brief conversation. Jessica had been shopping for cabinet hardware for a kitchen renovation she was funding with her teaching salary and her husband's banking income. I'd been shopping for materials to renovate a bathroom in a rental property that generated more monthly income than most people in Blackfoot earned from their primary jobs. She'd asked about my work, assuming I was still struggling to make ends meet through whatever opportunities one could find. In reality, I just closed on my 10th rental property and was preparing to hire my first full-time employee to help manage the growing portfolio. Most importantly, she had no idea that every month, she wrote a rent check that contributed to the success of the man she'd once predicted would never amount to anything. Tonight, I'm sitting in the home office I've set up in my duplex, reviewing financial statements and planning next year's expansion strategy. Jessica's rent check for December is on my desk, already deposited but not yet filed away with the others. The check represents more than just monthly income. It's a tangible reminder of how completely circumstances can change when someone decides to stop accepting other people's limitations as their own reality. 3 years ago, Jessica saw a dishwasher with no prospects and no ambition. Today, she's unknowingly paying rent to a real estate investor whose portfolio generates more passive income than her professional salary. 3 years ago, she was embarrassed to be associated with someone who drove an old truck and lived in a small apartment. Today, she's living in a property I own, writing checks that fund my financial independence. The transformation didn't happen because I wanted to prove her wrong, though that was certainly motivating in the beginning. It happened because her harsh assessment forced me to confront some hard truths about complacency and potential that I might never have faced otherwise. Jessica's prediction that I'd never amount to anything became the catalyst for the most productive period of my life. Her dismissal of my prospects became the foundation for my determination to create something bigger than anyone imagined possible. But the real victory isn't that she pays me rent. The real victory isn't even the financial success I've built. The real victory is that I finally learned to see opportunity where others see only obstacles, to find possibility where others see only problems. In a strange way, I'm grateful for Jessica's harsh words 3 years ago. They forced me to stop seeing myself through other people's eyes and start seeing myself through the lens of what I could accomplish rather than what I'd accomplished so far. Every month, when her rent check arrives, I'm reminded that the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't an argument or an explanation. It's building a life so successful that other people's opinions become irrelevant. Jessica was wrong about my future, but she was absolutely right about one thing. I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago. That person was limited by other people's expectations, constrained by conventional definitions of success, and trapped by the belief that circumstances determine destiny. The person I am today understands that circumstances are just starting points, that success is built through daily decisions rather than dramatic moments, and that the best revenge against those who write you off is writing your own story of triumph. And every month, Jessica helps fund that story, one rent check at a time. Sometimes the people who predict your failure end up financing your success. Sometimes the most motivating words are the ones meant to discourage you. And sometimes the best way to prove someone wrong is to build a life so fulfilling that their opinion stops mattering entirely. Thanks for listening to this powerful story. Subscribe for more stories about the surprising ways people change our lives for the better. See you in the next story.